not cross that line to making purely political decisions.
You worked with her on drug issues very much. Seeing how Ms. Bondi handled the opioid crisis in Florida, how do you think she will handle the crisis on a national level?
I think she's going to get tough on fentanyl across the border. I don't know the specifics on how she plans to tighten up on it, but I know she's going to make it a priority, because when we had an opioid epidemic in Florida and we were the drug supplier for the rest of the country, she went to a reluctant Republican-dominated legislature and told them we needed to pass this prescription drug monitoring program, something that had been stalled for a decade in Tallahassee, and she got it done. I had run on that platform. If I had been elected Attorney General as a Democrat, I don't think I could have persuaded that legislature to do it, but she had the credibility. It took Nixon to go to China. It took her to convince a recalcitrant Republican legislature to pass these needed reforms. So I don't know specifically what she will do, but I know that she will not shy away from standing up to people in her own party who will disagree with her on it.
Mr. Cox, you've worked with Ms. Bondi for 3 decades, and you're also a longest-serving statewide prosecutor. Some have suggested that Ms. Bondi's lobbying and political career will influence her decision-making. In your decades of working with her, have you ever known her to make a decision that was illegal or unethical?
Absolutely not. Ms. Bondi, as Mr. Ehrenberg referred to, and quite honestly, Ms. McCord could tell you as well, being a prosecutor is about focusing on the law and focusing on the evidence and focusing on really what's right. That's what our job is, to do justice. I know that she's embraced that. She's practiced that. I have never seen anything untoward in any of the cases I ever worked with Ms. Bondi.
And Sheriff Gainey, you served as Ms. Bondi's Director of Law Enforcement and Victim Services. You spoke in your opening statement about Ms. Bondi's work at federal, state, and local, with state and federal and local law enforcement. What would you say is Ms. Bondi's biggest achievement as Florida's Attorney General from the perspective of you as a law enforcement officer?
Senator, her willingness to partner with law enforcement is not uncommon for her to call together sheriffs and police chiefs, state law enforcement and federal, to seek from those leaders and directors what the issues are. Florida is a large state. Those issues are vast, and they change from one state to the other. She sits down with those partners, discusses those issues, and then fiercely do everything in her power to ensure that the men and women in our state and our federal offices in our state have the resources and the tools to do their job. Was not uncommon. We had, during legislative session, Sheriff's Association met in her office. The Florida Prosecutors Association met in her office. She provided space so it can be there to consult with her and her team and her staff on a regular basis as we address issues before our legislature every single year.
Senator Urban.
Sheriff Gainey, let me follow up with you on that subject. You're aware of what happened here January 6th in the Capitol complex and the law enforcement personnel who were attacked by the mob, the demonstrators, and a number of them, hundreds of them, have been prosecuted, and some are serving sentences for violent felonies against our police. Was there anything like that in your background dealing with Ms. Bondi, where she's been called on to make a decision on standing up for law enforcement in similar circumstances?
Senator, every single day, quite frankly. She had worked with, we unfortunately experienced law enforcement officers killed in the state of Florida. She was there not only to work with those law enforcement agencies and those families, the respected prosecutors, whether it was our statewide or our local prosecutors or our federal prosecutors. She was a fierce supporter to make sure that the laws of the state of Florida was enforced, that men and women of law enforcement were supported, and that their families knew that she supported them on a regular basis.
Mr. Cox, you talked about several instances, experiences you had with Ms. Bondi when she was under political pressure. Could you tell us a little bit more about one of those?
Quite candidly, there was some pressure at the beginning when Mr. Ehrenberg mentioned about the, oh, I apologize.
You want to pull that microphone close to you?
That is the first time anyone's asked me to pull a microphone closer.
I may change my mind. Go ahead.
You wouldn't be the first. Many judges have. Ranking Member Durbin, yes, right from the beginning, when Mr. Ehrenberg mentioned about the problems we had with the opioid epidemic and the pill mills, she was actually, I will say this, was getting some pushback from our governor, Senator Rick Scott. And it was about the PDMP. And I was there when she sat down with Senator Scott. I believe Sheriff Gainey was there with us as well. And we had a couple sheriffs, and we were speaking with Ms. Bondi about it. She called the governor, now senator, I apologize, right then, and put him on the phone with us and had us discuss with him the need for the PDMP, the Prescription Drug Monitoring Database, and which ended up making a massive change. And to the senator's credit, he sat down and listened to us, asked us questions, and in the end, she convinced him we needed it. And as I recall, it was within the next week or two that he came up here and he announced his support for our PDMP. You know, she didn't have an agreement with a person who she loves. I mean, she very much got along very well with then Governor Scott. And she confronted him about it and changed his mind.
Now, here's a track record.
Yes, sir.
This newly elected president, as former president, fired 2 attorneys general under circumstances where they disagreed with him. Sessions, Senator Sessions in one instance and Bill Barr in another, and they were both fired. So it's pretty clear that he is not adverse to taking a different position than his attorney general and having a pretty short temper when it comes to dealing with it. That's the reality of what we see on the record, not once but twice. Can you understand our concern about whether she would react positively if he put that pressure on her?
I can understand your concern, yes, sir. But the Pam Bondi I know as a prosecutor, where her heart is as a prosecutor, and having my experience with her, myself telling her no when she was the Attorney General, I believe she will stand up to it. I truly believe that. She understands what our duty is. She understands, I think, the boundaries of the ethics, as she mentioned several times yesterday. She understands all of that. And she's a true prosecutor. Yes, sir, I believe she will do it.
Thank you. Ms. Gilbert, on this question of conflicts of interest and recusal, Ms. McCord, I invite you to answer this as well in the short time left. You seem to suggest that she can't recuse herself out of her current situation. Her background as a lobbyist and attorney representing private interest, that she might be able to find some response to it, but it can't overcome what you called systemic or whatever the characterization you used. Haven't we had attorneys general in the past with backgrounds in the private sector facing similar circumstances?
We have had lobbyists become attorney general in the past, but nowhere near the scope and scale of Ms. Bondi, with 30 clients of her own in just the last 5 years and coming from a firm that represents such a broad swath of corporate America. It would be very hard for her to remove herself from every situation that touches on these corporate interests. One easy example, I mentioned Geo Group. There's not a pending enforcement action or investigation into them. There is one into their top rival, the other biggest private prison company, Core Civic. She would not be expected to recuse herself from that. However, ramifications from it could impact Geo Group. And so it's just one small example of how interconnected corporate America is and how hard it will be for her to remove herself from all these situations.
I think my time is up. You next time.
Yeah, I'll be acting on behalf of the chair, and I am next in the order. Mr. Ehrenberg, you ran in a primary, got defeated by a Democrat, endorsed that Democrat in the general election against Pam Bondi, and Pam Bondi hired you? Thank you.
Correct, Senator.
Thank you. And actually, I can tell that you've still got a liberal leaning, because in the same sentence that you complimented Pam Bondi, you took a shot at the Republican-led legislature by calling them recalcitrant. So, I mean, folks, you need to pay attention to that. This is somebody who's been a foe, who probably spoke against her in a public setting, and she had the temperament and the good judgment to look past your political views and hire you into her organization. I think that says a lot about people. In fact, I've made friends with the guy that ran against me, and nobody on the Democrat side seems to like him anymore. Ms. Gilbert, this lobbying thing and I don't mean this in the time allowed. Can you talk about specific things that she lobbied for versus the firm that was retained? I don't know if Cutter hit the bingo card today. It may have for you. But then when Ms. Bondi explained that this was $115,000 a month for a firm that was handling human trafficking cases, is that bad? So I'm assuming not. So let's go to the next one. What specifically did she or the firm do for these yesterday? She focused it with Senator Booker on the abysmal state of the Bureau of Prisons. So she's clearly going to drill down on that. What in your due diligence, what specific acts did she, not her firm, did she engage in that makes you feel like her sincerity towards Senator Booker yesterday was not genuine?
I can't speak to her specific sincerity or motivations, but I can look
Speak specifically to what she lobbied for that you expressed as a concern for the Bureau of Prisons, or for the private prisons, specifically what she lobbied for.
Absolutely. So from what we know about her engagements with GEO Group, as mentioned in my testimony, they have been condemned for not having a lot of...
I get it. There are problems with them, but I guess I'm trying to get to what specific issues do you think she carries into this office that would undermine her credibility in trying to do a better job with the Bureau of Prisons? I'm just trying to get to the fact. I'm not an attorney. I don't even play one here. But I'm just trying to figure out what specific acts did she do, other than around here, it'll be on the bingo card for Kash Patel, because we know where that's headed. But what specifically, for any of the high-tech, any of them, what specifically did she advocate for, other than the, by reference, concern that we may have? That's all I want to know from your organization. What specifically have you found about Pam Bondi in a filing, in an argument, in a letter that she specifically said that you believe would undermine her credibility?
Yeah, and I think from our perspective, it is about the appearance of impropriety.
Okay, just appearances. So you don't have a specific example.
It's about the engagement with this entity and the fact
so I get it. But in the same way that we know the facts about Cutter now, because we ask about it, it'll be interesting to see what specific role that she played. Thank you. I appreciate you being here. Ms. McCord, you worked in the Obama administration. Were you a career or political?
The entirety of my time at the Department of Justice, I was in a career position.
You were in a career position? Okay, thank you. Mr. Gainey, it sounds like I did the same thing, or I have done the same thing that I think Pam Bondi has done, just call somebody out of the blue and say, we got to take it a different direction. Isn't it also, she got a lot of blowback from the Republican legislature for some of the work that she was doing, to the point that Mr. Amberg made. Is that true?
That is true, Senator. In fact, it's the call that Mr. Cox referenced was on a Saturday morning. Be more specific.
I bet if we went back at the time, like I sometimes get attacked, I bet if we went back at the times, we'd probably find several examples where people were taking shots at her from her side of the aisle for doing something that's proven to be very important. So she strikes me as somebody that was her power, that was her influence back in her time as prosecutor, and she stood up to them and did the right thing and didn't really care whether or not she got reelected. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Thank you all. On behalf of the chair, Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you very much. Thank you also to Senator Durbin, and thank you to the witnesses before us today. I am going to start with you, Ms. McCord. Welcome back to the committee. If we could just go through these answers, because I think it's really important to put this outside of personal friendships, all these things, whether or not the Attorney General is a Democrat, Republican, who's in charge. And you testified that the Attorney General is not the President's personal attorney. In fact, the person is the attorney for the United States, the AG is. And you referenced Attorney General William French Smith's comments at his nomination hearing. Can you talk about the importance of maintaining this distinction that the AG is the attorney for the U.S. and not for the President?
So it's important not only to have the confidence of the career prosecutors and law enforcement officials, department, but also to the country, because the loyalty does need to be to the United States and to the Constitution. And there may be times, and I think Senator Durbin pointed out times in the previous Trump administration where the Attorney General did not show sufficient loyalty to Donald Trump, and those attorneys lost their positions.
Okay. Thank you. And in your written testimony, you described the Justice Department's White House contacts policy that was established following the Watergate scandal. It's been reaffirmed by AGs under both Republican and Democratic presidents ever since. The policy states that all communications about particular cases from the White House or Congress must be referred to the AG or other high-level officials in the Justice Department in order to preserve the integrity and independence of DOJ investigations from political interference. Yesterday, I asked Ms. Bondi if she agreed with former Attorney General McCasey, Republican Attorney General, that any attempt, that was his words, any attempt by the White House, his words, to interfere with a case is not to be countenanced, and any call to align assistance or to a United States attorney from a political person relating to a case is to be cut and curtailed. She affirmed that she agreed with that statement. You also testified to a parallel White House policy, Ms. McCord. Can you speak to the importance of both the Justice Department and the White House maintaining and abiding by strict contacts policies?
Well, historically, like I said, post-Watergate, these policies have been instituted under Republican and Democratic administrations. In fact, Don McGahn, the White House counsel in the first Trump administration, reissued that White House contacts policy in January of the first term because he recognized the importance that it not just be a DOJ policy, that all within the White House staff know not to pressure the department or other departments and agencies when it comes to specific matters.
And how can Congress exercise its oversight authorities to ensure that the policies on both sides are being followed?
I think starting with the questions you asked yesterday, Senator Klobuchar, is a good start. And if it should come, if there should come any time where it seems like these policies are not being complied with, or if there is a refusal to adopt or continue those policies, those are something that Congress should be very concerned about.
Okay. Ms. Gilbert, you've been before us many times on the subject of antitrust. And as you know, and I know, and many Democrats and Republicans on this committee know, monopolies will go very far to preserve their power. Tech-funded groups, for instance, spent hundreds of millions of dollars against Senator Grassley in my bill, which was, of course, not just supported by consumer groups, but also by groups as conservative as the NFIB, the Small Business Association, because of the unfairness of monopoly tech companies putting their own products at the top of their search engines and the unfair competition that results when they have that kind of power. You know, there are cases out there right now that are really important on monopolies: Google, Apple, Live Nation, Ticketmaster, RealPage, that are being litigated to their fullest. Why is it important that the new AG continue these cases to protect consumers, enhance competition, and just the general question about the rules of the road and how important this is as Senator Grassley and I reintroduce our bill?
Absolutely. Thank you for that question and for your and Senator Grassley's great work in this space. We are hopeful that the new Department of Justice will continue the cases that have been begun over the last 4 years. We've been really excited to see the strong forward momentum for dealing with corporate concentration, taking on monopolies head on. It's so important for consumers. Public Citizen is a consumer organization, and as we think about regular people and engaging with the markets, if they are squeezed out, if they can't sell their products, if there isn't fair competition, if small businesses can't get ahead, these are all problems for regular Americans. And so just really hopeful that the DOJ will continue what they've started, that these cases roll on, and then also want to put a plug in for your fantastic bill, yours and Senator Grassley's. We hope as the DOJ continues, so can the work here in the Senate on this important policy to stop self-preferencing, as you mentioned.
All right. Well, thank you. And I wanted to thank also others on the panel for their important work when it comes to pill mills and what it was and is going on with these horrible, horrible situations where people are getting hooked while people are profiting off of it. Thank you.
On behalf of the chair, Senator Schmidt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've heard a lot about the newfound concern that my Democrat colleagues have about independence in the AG's office. Given over the last 4 years, it is ironic. Ms. McCord, I do want to ask you, you're talking about the importance of independence. Is it concerning to you that Eric Holder, while he was Attorney General, described himself as Obama's heat shield and his wingman? Is that concerning to you?
That's probably not the best description of the job of the Attorney General, but I think the record probably speaks for itself and speaks differently.
Okay. Loretta Lynch met with Bill Clinton just days before the FBI interviewed Hillary Clinton on the investigation as it relates to emails. Does that meeting with the spouse and former president of the subject of the investigation, is that concerning to you as it relates to the appearance of independence?
My understanding of that is a chance encounter at an airport on the tarmac, and that does not actually give me concern.
Okay. I don't think that's what happened, but that's an interesting characterization of that. But I think, and I'm going to switch to you now, Mr. Cox, because these are sort of related. I think the frustration a lot of Americans feel and why the decline in trust and faith in the Department of Justice is they saw exactly what happened over the last 4 years, which was a very obvious attempt to try to jail a political opponent. And I'm not going to ask you to comment on that.
Thank you.
Yes. I'm not going to ask you to comment on that, but I think that's why you see a lot of the questions that are asked by my Republican colleagues on this committee. It's just this lawfare. We don't want to see it continue. But what we've seen over the last 4 years is a total disgrace. And I think for the hardworking men and women in the Department of Justice who aren't engaged in this, it's affected the department's reputation, and why I'm such a big believer in Pam Bondi and what she can do and try to restore credibility to an agency that has been weaponized and politicized, and get it back to its core function, which is objectively administering justice and taking on violent crime. And I just want to ask you, in your experience with Pam Bondi, this has been what she's done. She's a career prosecutor, right? I mean, you can see her embracing this role of working with, whether it's the U.S. attorneys or other law enforcement around the country, of taking on violent crime, because we need leadership there. We've got a lot of, crime has gone up. And, I'm from a state that has, St. Louis and Kansas City, and we had partnerships when I was Attorney General with the U.S. Attorney's Office to take on violent crime. And when Joe Biden came into office, those were severed for political reasons, which is wrong. It's not a partisan issue. Do you see that as a role that she will play as Attorney General?
Absolutely, but what you just described about the relations with law enforcement is what not only she practiced, she encouraged all of us around her to do. And I could not agree more with you about your assessment of Ms. Bondi on that. Look, we're prosecutors. I mean, at her heart, Pam's a prosecutor. And our job is to go in and fight crime. But, we don't take lightly, those of us that are career prosecutors, that our job is to do justice. I mean, that's what the courts have said. And at her heart, 100%, that's Pam Bondi. It really is. So yes, and Pam loves law enforcement. I mean, let's not kid each other. We all love law enforcement and everybody and everything they stand for. And so, yes, sir, I believe she would do that with law enforcement and prosecutors. She did it in Florida.
And we'll talk offline about your role. It's an interesting role because in Missouri, the local prosecutors are the ones, there's no office of statewide prosecutors, so I'm not going to ask you about that. I just find that
common.
It's not a common thing. But in your experience in serving with Pam Bondi, did you find her committed to enforcing the law equally and impartially?
Oh, yes, sir, I did. I mean, that's what we're supposed to do. And she embraced it. Yes, sir, she did. She is a complete prosecutor. She is a total prosecutor. And that's why when I speak to her independence, it's because she believes in it and it's in her heart. I mean, seeing her recently, I know that's where she is. I really truly meant it when I said to my colleagues at the U.S. Department of Justice, if confirmed, you're going to love working with Pam Bondi.
I couldn't agree with you more, which is why I was thrilled to be able to give that introduction yesterday of Pam. I think she's going to be an outstanding Attorney General. And I think she, like I said yesterday, I think she deserves a bipartisan vote, not only in this committee, but on the Senate floor. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you, sir.
Senator Welch, you're next.
Thank you very much. And I think all the witnesses, I read your statements and watched, and I want to thank the Florida folks for being here on behalf of somebody that you know well and worked with a long time. She clearly is a competent person and has quite a resume. So you reaffirmed that. A couple of questions that that I have are less about her and her qualifications and more about this question that looms out there, where there's a mutual concern here about not using the justice system for political reasons. And there's a point of view with my Republican colleagues that it's been used that way in the prosecutions against Donald Trump. I don't agree with that, but I hear them on that. And there's a concern on my part, and I think a lot of our others, that Donald Trump has made very explicit statements that he intends to pursue political adversaries, and he's named them, including my colleague, Mr. Schiff, Liz Cheney. And he is now a president who enjoys the benefit of he will be a president who enjoys the benefit of the immunity decision by the Supreme Court. I strongly disagree with that decision. I don't think anybody is above the law. That's the whole basis upon which our country was founded. But I take him seriously when he says he wants a prosecutor to go after after his political adversaries. And the tradition in the Justice Department since Watergate has been to really create a near firewall between the administration, the executive, and the Justice Department because of its special role. And all of you are law enforcement, so you just know how awesome that power is that you have, and you have to have restraint as well as aggression. So how does an attorney general handle a president who has already put an immense amount of pressure on Bill Barr, one of his attorney general, who did it on Mr. Sessions? And shouldn't we take seriously the president's threat, President Trump's threat, that he's going to go after his political adversaries? And how do we deal with that? And how do we assess that in terms of this decision? I'll ask you, Ms. McCord, to start.
Thank you, Senator. As we know that in the first Trump administration, Attorney General Sessions made the decision to recuse himself from the Russia investigation because of his work with Donald Trump during the campaign and because of meetings he had had with the Russian ambassador during the campaign. He recognized that appearance of impropriety and the need for independence. He also appointed a special counsel to take over that investigation. Those are the kind of steps that are required when there could be pressure, and there was pressure put on Attorney General Sessions. Indeed, I think forever after that recusal decision, he fell out of favor with the president and ultimately was fired. But those are the things that an independent attorney general needs to take seriously and needs to do to demonstrate that commitment to independence from political influence.
And what's difficult here is that none of us know whoever is in that job and is confronted by a very determined President Trump to do something that from the prosecution point of view may not be appropriate, a political prosecution of an adversary for payback. There's no way to know how any of us, as committed as we are, would be able to withstand that pressure. But I'll talk to you, sir. You work with Pam Bondi, and have a high opinion of her. I'll give you the opportunity to say how she would be able to withstand what I think is inevitably going to be an enormous amount of pressure by the president at a certain point when he decides, directed towards whoever serves as his attorney general.
Let me start out by saying I've been fortunate enough not to be in that situation because I've had attorneys general that I work for, like Pam Bondi and Ashley Moody. However, a prosecutor's job is a solemn thing. The impact we have on lives is, you mentioned the power, and you're absolutely right. It's got to be respected, it's got to be appreciated, it's got to be embraced. And sometimes that means that I've been in positions before where I've thought, if I do or say this, I could lose my job. But you've got to be willing to do that. I don't know how else to say it. It's tough. It's very tough. My job, fortunately, is really not a political job because of my AGs. But you do have to be in the position sometimes when right is right to have to stand up and buck up.
All right, well, thank you very much. I yield back.
Senator Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to each of the witnesses who are here today. Mr. Cox, let me start with you.
Yes, sir.
You worked with Attorney General Bondi for over 35 years.
Yes, sir.
Can you speak to her leadership style and how she managed the Attorney General's office?
Fair, of course, very kind, but firm. She was very decisive. That's what I liked about her. But in her decision, Ms. Bondi always listened. There were times she and I disagreed, several times, many times, where we would disagree, and she would hear me out. Sometimes I'd change her mind, believe it or not. So it wasn't often, but it happened. But sometimes, she would listen to me and go the way she felt. That was her job. She was the Attorney General. But she is very firm. She's very decisive. And I will tell you, the number of times I walked with her, she appreciates my role and our role as prosecutors. The number of times I would walk away from her and she wouldn't agree with my decision, maybe on a particular case, and she would tell me, do what you got to do. I mentioned it earlier in my statement. That's the Pam Bondi that I worked with. That's why I'm so confident in her that she can fill this role.
So I think the single most important responsibility that General Bondi will have at the Department of Justice is restoring integrity to the department. I think over the last 4 years, we have seen a pattern of politicization and weaponization of the Department of Justice that has done massive damage to that institution, a storied institution that is incredibly important for the rule of law. Speak to your assessment of General Bondi's integrity and her ability to restore integrity to DOJ.
Might I just answer that first off by saying she's a prosecutor, and that's what we're supposed to do. I've spoke to it several times, and I won't repeat myself, Senator. At her heart, she believes in the system. She believes in what we do. I don't think it gets more, with all due respect to everybody in this room and that may be listening, I don't know how much more serious it gets on impacting lives than being a prosecutor and being a judge who has to handle these cases. And she's always respected that. You know, I mentioned in my statement, she's never forgotten, she's never lost her humanity, and she hasn't. Might I say, I don't know if this is answering your question, Pam Bondi likes people, and she wants people to like her. And I don't know that that's so bad for an attorney general either, but she appreciates the impact of this job. I hope I've answered your question, Senator.
All right, Mr. Ehrenberg, let's turn to you. So you and I have known each other 30 years. We were classmates in law school. It's good to see you. Welcome, welcome to the swamp. You live in Palm Beach, which is a lot nicer weather than it is up here. And you spent 3 terms as the elected state attorney in Palm Beach County. You're a Democrat. You ran as a Democrat. Were elected as a Democrat. And you also, in this last election, voted for Kamala Harris. Is that right?
Correct.
You've also worked closely with General Bondi.
Correct.
In your judgment, describe, same question I asked Mr. Cox, how would you describe her leadership style and how would you describe her integrity?
Well, Senator Cruz, in full disclosure, we weren't just classmates, you and I. We lived in the same dorm first year before either of us had any gray hair.
And burn those pictures.
Fair enough. Mr. Cox is right. She has a very hands-on style. Everyone in the office knows her. She was not isolated from the rest of us. She walked the hallways. She was friends with everyone. She brought her dog to work sometimes, even though it probably violated code. And it was a big dog, the Saint Bernard. And she was just she's a very likable
Didn't have a
person.
barrel of whiskey under its neck, did it?
Only in Bugs Bunny cartoons. She's a very likable person. And I think you'll find that from everyone who knows her in Tallahassee and throughout Florida. It's hard not to like. You can disagree with her politically, and she and I have our political differences. But as far as a boss, she never tried to big time anyone. She's a person like everyone else. She expects the best from people, but she has a real human touch about her.
Now, you also worked with her very closely, in particular, in going after pill mills. Can you describe what you and she were able to accomplish together on that?
We were able to shut down the pill mills. Florida was the pill supplier for the rest of the country. 98 of the top 100 doctors who dispense pills were in Florida. It was a national embarrassment. The OxyContin Express from Appalachia down to Florida. People would come down, buy their drugs, use, abuse, and then go home and sell them for a profit. We ended that. She appointed me to be the lead person, but we could not have done it without her. She was the person who got the legislature to change the laws. We couldn't have done any of that without that. She was the one who convinced them to pass the prescription drug monitoring program. That was indispensable. So it was her leadership that really led to a dramatic decrease in the number of deaths from opioid overdoses.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for testifying today. Professor McCord, I'd like to ask you about January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol. Can you succinctly define domestic terrorism?
Domestic terrorism under the United States Code is a crime, an act of violence that is a crime under federal or state law that is done with the attempt to influence a policy of government through intimidation or coercion.
Based on that definition, were some of the acts committed on January 6th acts of domestic terrorism?
Certainly the acts of violence that violate the criminal code do seem to have appeared for many of the people based on their own statements. Many of the defendants in cases that are being prosecuted, they seem to have been done to influence the policy of the government, and specifically to not certify the electoral college ballots on January 6th.
Yesterday, Ms. Bondi refused to disavow President Trump calling the insurrectionists hostages and patriots. What effect would President Trump's pardoning of these criminals have on our country? What is the message if that were to happen?
Senator, I believe it would have an enormous impact on the criminal legal system, and I would say also on our judiciary. In fact, I published a piece about that this morning in The Atlantic. We have our federal judges here appointed by Republicans, Democrats, and President Trump himself, who uniformly have condemned the crimes of those who have been convicted due to their attack on the U.S. Capitol. That anything close to a blanket pardon, which is what has been suggested but not promised by Donald Trump, without individual consideration of cases, would severely undermine these federal judges and undermine the criminal legal system.
We know, and this has come up with one of my colleagues, we know from the disastrous Supreme Court immunity decision that President Trump pretty much has a free pass to do what he wants. An unfettered president is even more dangerous if the Department of Justice is not independent. So based on your extensive experience at the DOJ, are there warning signs that we should watch for to signal that the DOJ has lost its independence?
Senator, I think as we've seen sometimes in the past, that when there are concerns among the career prosecutors and law enforcement officials at the department who have responsibility over investigations and cases, when they have felt pressured, many of them have actually resigned. We saw that during the first Trump administration with respect to some of the prosecutions involving Michael Flynn and Roger Stone.
So I take it that people resigning is one indication that all is not well, that independence is maybe not what's in practice. I'm just wondering, if we were to ask the Attorney General if the President ordered you or suggested or hinted that you go after his perceived political enemies. Would the Attorney General be able to cite attorney-client privilege and not respond to us?
I don't want to give a legal opinion on that, Senator. I do think that that is the type of pressure that we are looking to an Attorney General to stand up to from the White House, and I certainly want to take Ms. Bondi at her word when she, under oath yesterday, said she would exercise independence.
Well, the thing is, what's deeply concerning about Ms. Bondi is that she is very loyal to President-elect Trump, and he demands 100% loyalty of all of his people. So yesterday, Ms. Bondi could not say that President Biden had won the election in 2020. That is a basic fact. And I think that it was her loyalty to President-elect Trump that basically made it hard for her, impossible, for her to say that President Biden had won the election. So that is concerning. Based on what we heard yesterday, I'm very concerned that if confirmed, Attorney General Bondi will say yes if and when President Trump asks her to do something illegal. And the thing is that not much of what President-elect Trump will do is going to be deemed illegal because of the Supreme Court's disastrous immunity decision. So I'm really struggling with how are we to know that all is not well in terms of the independence of the DOJ. One thing would be if they adopt a policy, or if the president adopts a policy that he will not order the DOJ around, even if this incoming president has said the Justice Department is basically his law firm. So if you have any further suggestions aside from people actually resigning to indicate that the kind of independence we are looking for is not being followed, I would welcome that.
Yes, and Senator
you,
Ruano,
Mr.
your
Chair.
time is up. Thank you.
Please respond.
Thank you. Let's see. Mr. Cox, I'd like to start with you. I heard your comments with regards to both Pam Bondi, who we are here for today, and you heap praise on Attorney General Moody, who you work for as well. I'd like to say a public congratulations to her being named Senate designee and be the next senator from Florida. Oh, look, I get to deliver the news to you. So DeSantis just came out and said she will be joining us. I am thrilled. I mean, as a mom of school-age kids, to have another woman sitting right here next to me, fighting for the people that we serve, with what I understand is her brilliant intellect, her ability and her passion for the people of Florida, which I know she will bring to the United States Senate. I cannot wait to call her a colleague. So on behalf of me and all of us, welcome to Attorney General Moody's new Senate designee. We look forward to her taking the ranks.
Might I respond or comment for just
Sure,
briefly?
absolutely.
Senators, you're going to love Ashley Moody. She is a wonderful person to work with. She's brilliant. That is, wow.
Wow,
Thank
right?
you for telling me.
I'm so excited I got to tell you.
Best thing about it is I can say I learned that in the United States
In the
Senate.
United States Senate, that's right. And hopefully she will be up here just in the next few days after we confirm Senator Rubio, who's going to do an exceptional job as Secretary of State. So congratulations to Ashley, and cannot wait to serve with her.
Thank you.
So now let's talk about another amazing woman, Pam Bondi. I have heard you over and over again when you respond to questions talking about her. I think you said she is fair, kind, and firm. You have talked about the fact that she is transparent and impartial. I would like for you one more time to say to the American people, based on your previous work with Pam Bondi, can you explain how she'll continue to operate, you believe, in that manner, in a fair and transparent manner as she takes the helm of the Justice Department?
But because she believes in everything you just questioned me about, and she practiced it in Florida. You know, whether you agreed with her or not, Pam Bondi, like I said, is a person who really likes people. I think we should welcome that into government. I think that sometimes we lose sight of prosecutors, I'm going to speak to myself, we can lose sight of the fact of the ranking member mentioned, the immense power that we have, and we get caught up in it. Pam Bondi doesn't get caught up in those kinds of trappings.
I love it.
Yeah, she loves people, and she at her heart, again, is a prosecutor. As Mr. Ehrenberg had mentioned, nobody has anything to fear from Pam Bondi. She is going to be a breath of fresh air if y'all send her there.
Absolutely, and I think we need to restore those very things, fairness and transparency to the department, and I look forward to her taking the helm. She's going to do that for the American people, and it's an exciting new day, so thank you so very much.
And thank you for the news.
Absolutely, we are thrilled. So, Mr. Ehrenberg, I learned obviously that we need to talk with you offline about getting those the stories on cruise, right? And also that she has a Saint Bernard. I have a Newfoundland, so who knew that we both had love for the large dogs? And Sheriff Gainey, I know that you've had an opportunity to work with Pam Bondi as well. I want to talk to you specifically, both of you, about the opioid epidemic, about what we've seen with drug trafficking. I mentioned it yesterday. We heard Pam lean into this as well, but there is nowhere in my state that I travel where someone does not tell me a story about losing a loved one to opioid abuse, addiction, overdose. And so tell me from your experience and how she works with state and local law enforcement officers, state and local leaders. I'm a big believer that local leaders know best. And you have people that come to DC that somehow get here and believe that we become experts on every issue. And the truth is you have to talk to the boots on the ground to learn what to do, how to do it, and to affect real change. And so can you both speak to her relationships with state and local law enforcement and workforce and how you believe she'll carry that to the Department of Justice, please?
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Senator Britton. Thank you for the news about Attorney General Moody. I hope Nick Cox still has a job when he goes home. When I was Attorney General Bondi's drug czar, we were visited by Gil Kurlikowski, who was President Obama's drug czar nationally. And it was a very productive meeting. I still have the pictures from that meeting. Not once was there ever a discussion that, well, he's from the feds, we shouldn't trust him, he's a Democrat, we shouldn't trust him, none of that. We were just trying to get the job done. And so she's seen it from both perspectives, as a state official working with the feds, and now being a federal official working with the locals. The person who can best talk about how she has a great relationship with local law enforcement is Emory Gainey, because he was the liaison. She had a special liaison within her office to make sure that she had a seamless relationship working with local officials. I saw it, but Mr. Gainey is the best to talk about it.
Yes, and Sheriff Gainey, if you don't mind leaning into that, I am out of time, but would love to hear your response.
Thank you, Senator. Unequivocally, that's one of the forward-leaning rules of Pam Bondi. Work with our law enforcement leaders. Learn and understand the issues that each of those face. I mentioned earlier, we're a large state, as you well know. So there are diverse issues that the law enforcement from one end of our state, the others have to deal with. Pam listens to those. She encourages those. She asks for advice, want to know what's happening in the community, just the whole pill mill. And the bath salt issue was brought to her by a panhandle sheriff, quite frankly. What we've learned in law enforcement, we often see these things first. We start seeing these trends, and then we try to get them to our legislative leaders and our cabinet leaders to say, this is happening in our state. Sometimes they listen to us, other times they don't. Pam listened. She listened right away. She immediately sought out to understand what was causing that issue, and then sought legislation to get it done against some of our Republican legislators at the time who didn't want it. But her tenacity prevailed. She got it done. Our state is a safer state because of Pam Bondi.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Senator Schiff.
Thank you. Thank you to all the witnesses for being here today. Greatly appreciate your testimony. Ms. McCord, you testified, thank you for all your good work over the years. You testified before the committee last September on the repercussions of Trump versus the United States, the case on presidential immunity. You wrote, I think in your written testimony, there's nothing stopping a president from directing the investigation of his political enemies, journalists, or activists, even where there is no basis for doing so. As you will recall from the hearing yesterday, I asked Ms. Bondi a number of questions about what her intentions were, how she would respond if the president asked her to investigate someone, whether she thought there was a factual predicate for a case, for example, an investigation against Jack Smith or Liz Cheney. For the most part, she refused to answer any specific question. Didn't give me a lot of confidence in her willingness to push back against those kind of improper orders from the president. What should the Attorney General do? If a president is now, by virtue of this dangerous Supreme Court decision, immune from prosecution from violating the law and using the Department of Justice to do it, it doesn't mean the Attorney General should go along with it. What should the Attorney General do if the president says, I want you to investigate such and such political opponent?
Well, first of all, I would say the immunity decision right now, as far as we know, applies only to the president. And so there's no immunity for Attorney General Bondi if she were to engage in illegal activity or unconstitutional activity in carrying out a directive of Donald Trump. But I think before we even get to that, it would be important for her to make clear that she is not going to direct her department attorneys or the FBI to initiate unfounded investigations. If they're as departments of justice throughout all of my tenure there, always we followed the facts and the law and did not target any person for investigation based on political reasons. So it's really, that's why the independence is so much more important even now in the wake of that decision, because she is the first person to have a position of standing up to the president.
I also asked Ms. Bondi whether she would commit to preserving the evidence that was gathered as a part of the January 6th investigation by the department. She refused to commit to even preserving the evidence. Are there laws in place, or is it merely department policy not to destroy evidence? Should we have any confidence that that evidence will be preserved?
Well, there certainly are Federal Records Act obligations that require that records be maintained. And so I think that she would be well advised to consult with attorneys, career attorneys who specialize in the Department of Justice, and be guided by their counsel. And it's certainly important in this case, as in these cases, as in every case prosecuted by the Department of Justice or investigated, to maintain records.
And if I could ask both you and Ms. Gilbert, recusal question. So Ms. McCord, maybe let me ask you about where you think the circumstance would be appropriate for her to recuse herself vis-a-vis her prior representation of the president. And Ms. Gilbert, in terms of her corporate clients as a lobbyist, when would it be appropriate for her to recuse herself from working on or influencing department decisions vis-a-vis her former lobbyist clients?
Senator Schiff, I think with respect to her previous, personal representation of Donald Trump, she needs to be very concerned, as William French Smith was when he took on this job for President Reagan, having been Reagan's personal attorney, that anything that would appear to be improper, that would show impartiality, she should recuse from. So, for example, investigations into anyone who was involved in the first impeachment proceedings or prosecution, because she defended Donald Trump in those proceedings. Even any investigations or prosecutions into those involved with the cases against Donald Trump, because she has made public statements about prosecutors and investigators needing to be targeted potentially. She's used the term the bad ones. I'm not sure what that means in legal parlance. So I think these are the types of matters, including also civil matters. There is Donald Trump has, through his attorneys, filed notice of a civil action against the Department of Justice based on the search of Mar-a-Lago. Clearly, it would be improper for her to take any part in that, in responding to that case.
Thank you. And I just would like to note that obviously yesterday she clarified that she'd never represented President Trump in a personal matter, but actually worked there directly with the White House. Also, it's interesting because we have seen this body confirm members who have lobbied for the Chinese Communist Party and confirmed them to positions at ODNI. And it didn't seem that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle had an issue with that. And it's also interesting that we continue to hear General Sessions being brought up at these hearings over and over again. I do want to remind people, obviously, he is from the great state of Alabama, but not one member of the Democratic Party in this actual hearing voted for him through his confirmation process. So I just want to make sure that we set the record straight on that as well. But thank you to all of our witnesses.
I know I'm out of time.
Yes.
Would it be possible for the other witness to answer? She didn't have an opportunity because the clock ran out.
I think we are out of time, but I appreciate that. Thank you. And thank you to our witnesses for testifying today. I know that some of you traveled long and hard to be here, and we are grateful that you did that. The record will stay open until 5 p.m. tonight, and so if you would like to add something to that, you are more than welcome to. And all written questions are due at that time as well. The hearing is adjourned.
Of them. Any thoughts about that? Because I'm sure in North Dakota that you had to address this issue too.
Well, in North Dakota, we took part of the revenues that were coming into the state from the oil and gas tax revenues, and we created a abandoned well reclamation fund, and that's been replenished, and then that goes back in to do that. But we've also made sure that the private sector is doing their share.
Now, let me ask, because one thing I hear from the private sector is the issue of liability protection. Will they be sued the bejesus out of if something goes bad about this remediation of the abandoned oil and gas well? And I ask this, I don't know the answer to it. We're trying to explore that. There is the abandoned mine provisions that we're looking at. How did y'all manage that in North Dakota?
Well, we always were looking for incentives to make sure that the private sector was willing to participate as opposed to afraid to participate. And you're describing this thing where if you get unlimited liability, then they want to run the other way and lawyer up and do that, as opposed to, hey, if you got the appropriate bond levels that are economic, they pay those up front. We exhaust those. If they've got other payments that they need to do, we've just been able to work collaboratively in a way to make sure that the private sector is doing their share when we're doing this. And part of that, their shares, because we're taking if they weren't investing in creating the well, putting in the people, doing the development, taking the risk on the front end, we wouldn't have the revenue to split up on the back end.
So we're going to look at what y'all did in North Dakota as we draft our legislation. One more thing, knowing that you'll be in charge of this, as I gather, this kind of how do we do energy sort of thing. One thing that I've been concerned about is that countries like China do not enforce international standards on controlling pollution. That lowers their cost of manufacturing as much as 20%, incentivizing manufacturers to leave our country and move there. But then we get the loss of the jobs, but also all the air pollution that then blows over to our West Coast. I think I read 20% of the SOx in California is related to emissions from China. Now, one thing I've been proposing, Senator Graham is my co-sponsor, is a foreign pollution fee that would put a fee on certain products from a country like China roughly equal to their avoided cost of not complying with environmental regulations. As the president speaks about tariffs, this would be a tariff that would be thoroughly defensible as we address something the economists call externalities. I slept in a Holiday Inn last night, I know that word. So I go through that knowing that you and your position will be making sure that our industry is competitive in terms of controlling our emissions in accordance with the law, which then gives us that advantage relative to those competitors arbitraging those rules. Any quick comment on that? Because the chair is being generous and allowing me out a little extra time.
Well, I think you're spot on to recognize President Trump, who has a willingness to use tariffs. His principle is reciprocity. If you have access to our markets and we don't have access to yours, or if you're using unfair practices, if you're dumping in here, in this case, if they're not doing reclamation, they're using child labor, they're doing all the things that lower their cost, that's exactly the kind of place that he has publicly spoken about, that he would want to have reciprocity with tariffs.
Thank you very much.
Senator Hickenlooper. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Governor, for being here. Appreciate this. It's always good to have other governors in the room, or former governors, I guess, at this point. I've got 3 questions, so I'm going to be pretty quick in the questions, and I try to be unfailingly polite, but if I override you, it's just because I want to get to all 3 questions. Obviously, I worked on methane regulations back when I was governor. We were the first state or province anywhere in the world to actually regulate methane, but we did it by working with the industry. They came and helped create the regulations that they were going to guide them. Senator Cassidy was just talking about abandoned wells. It's all part of that same problem. As Secretary of the Interior, how do you think you can use your authority to advance rules that boost innovation in the energy sector to, you know, let's reduce methane is one thing, but I'll broaden the question and say, and getting to better, cleaner energy that's at the same time reliable and at a low cost?
Well, I should say, Mayor, Governor, Senator, I love this question because the focus on innovation. We've seen in North Dakota, again, the federal regulation comes in, it's proposed, it goes through the rule changing. It takes years to finally get it finalized, then it gets finalized, and then all of a sudden you got a federal employee in a white pickup with a clipboard, you know, driving around that the taxpayers are paying for, trying to find out if we've got an emission here, emission there. Meanwhile, if that's 6 to 8 years from the beginning of a problem to when the rule gets finalized and is actually enforced, we've gone through like 4 or 5 cycles of Moore's.
Get to the innovation.
We've gone through 4 or 5 cycles of Moore's Law, and then someone's got a solution to say we can do methane capture at the well, we can do it cheaply, we can do it this. They implement it, they can capture it, they can turn it into electricity, they can, you know, do power generation for a data center on site in on a well site. I mean, the amount of innovation that is occurring right now in the energy industry is unbelievable. It's as exciting as anything in tech that's going on. And so that's why I say innovation over regulation. We can solve these problems cheaper, faster, and quicker than we can through expensive and outdated regulations.
Yeah, we've never needed more innovation in a short time than we need in energy right now. As the energies are, on the other side, there have been a lot of reports about tariffs on critical minerals that possibly on everything. They're from all different, I mean, a lot of people are saying a lot of different things. So in terms of imposing tariffs without having a clear strategy on how we're going to secure the supply chains for these critical minerals essential to our defense, to our aerospace industry, go down the list, what's your plan to collaborate with our allies to make sure that we can ensure a reliable supply chain on these critical minerals?
Well, I think the key there is allies, because we need to be, we have to have a security network of people that are truly our allies, and we have to be able to buy and sell from each other around these critical minerals. But right now, we've been, over the last 20 years, I mean, we were, as a nation, one of the great mining economies in the world 20 years ago. It's become a dirty word. You can hardly find a kid in college that wants to go into geology or geologic or mining.
You're hurting me.
Well, you were there.
I am a geologist.
Yes, you are.
Or I was.
But you understand in your profession how that has shifted in your lifetime, and we've got to bring it back, because this is critical to our nation's future. And again, when we can do it here with innovation, better, cleaner, and safer than the world, we're actually helping the world environment when we do it in the United States.
We can set those standards, and I agree completely that we are the ones who are going to create a better way to extract minerals with less pollution and less risk. Last question. Obviously, public land is a key part of Colorado, just like they are of North Dakota. I commend you. I think what you did as a governor, you took a lot of what we did and did it better. It's very frustrating, but we governors like to give credit where credit is due. We have certain places in Colorado, and we discussed this when you were in my office last week, and I appreciate you taking the time with all that you've got going on to come and spend an hour with us. We have some places where local governments, the local community, the ranchers have kind of joined arms side by side to protect lands. We have one piece of land there that's called the Thompson Divide. And it's been somewhat controversial. There's one mining or oil company that felt that there was potential there. I took a pretty deep look at the seismic and couldn't see much source there, much potential, but it's been controversial. I wanted to make sure, A, to extend the invitation that you come to Colorado, which I'm sure everyone up here is, even if they haven't said it, they look forward to it, but to come and walk that landscape with some of the local ranchers and farmers there so you can get a sense that this isn't a partisan issue. This is a piece of land that pretty much everyone in the community has decided needs to be protected.
Well, I appreciate the invitation. I would look forward to it, Senator.
Great, thank you. Yield the floor.
Senator Brish. Governor, welcome. Can't tell you how glad I am to see another governor for this position. And particularly coming from west of the Mississippi. You know, if you look at this committee, it's kind of the former governor's club. There's a lot of us on here, and we have meetings from time to time. Hovind takes up most of the time trying to convince us there's a Z in bison, and we can't find it. So, in any event, thank you for doing this, and because of the fact that most of our western states are have so much federal land, it's really important we have somebody that understands those issues. So thank you for that, and thank you for the job. They've already had a discussion with you about grizzly bears. We don't want grizzly bears. They kill people. You know, the federal government already gave us wolves. We had them all killed off about 75 years ago, and then some yahoo back here decided we needed them again, and they brought him in and brought us 30 wolves and said when there were 200 and 3 breeding pairs, we could delist them. Well, by the time I became governor, there were at least 1,500 wolves. Nobody knows how many breeding pairs, and we couldn't get them delisted. Till I got back here, we finally were able to put together a coalition and got them delisted. Grizzly bears are so far over the top because they kill people. They really do kill people, and they just don't mesh with society. So in any event, we'll look forward to working with you on those issues. Probably one of the most important decisions you're going to make here in the immediate future is, I know how the transition team is working, and you and the transition team is going to have to pick a BLM director. And that's really important to us because all of us have it, that are western states have a tremendous amount of BLM land. We had a real problem with this one. Fortunately, she's only got about 95 hours left. She was an eco-terrorist. She engaged in the work that was done in Idaho of spiking trees. You probably know about spiking trees. Since she's been BLM director, we haven't seen her. She's been up here, I think, once in the 4 years, and it divided this committee deeply. We had a huge fight over it. It was a straight party line vote. She got confirmed. We don't want somebody like that running the BLM, particularly somebody we can't find. So I urge you to use your best decision-making ability when you choose that person. On another important issue, the issue for us in Idaho right now is the Lava Ridge windmill project. And my good friend Senator King and I have different views on windmills, and bless you for taking the windmills. You can have them all. We don't want them in Idaho. We hate windmills in Idaho. They are a tremendous blight on our viewscape. We really don't like them. And the new Green Deal that this administration has put together is trying to saddle us with 100,000 acres. 100,000 acres with 241 windmills on them that are a little higher than the Space Needle. And the good news is, I appreciate you meeting with me and listening to how wrong this project is on so many different levels. The good news is, and you don't know this yet, I don't think, but that project's only got about 95 hours left to be on the table. That's going to go by the by. And believe me, in Idaho, this is a 99 to 1% issue, and we're going to be so glad to see it gone. And it will be gone, and you're not going to have to worry about it anymore after that. Let me just close with this. I'm so glad to hear that the president is going to put you in a position he is on energy. That's incredible. We need it. We all know his vision for making America independent and actually being an exporter and tapping our wealth. One word we haven't used here in that regard is nuclear. Idaho is the birthplace of nuclear energy in the universe. We've still got the first light bulbs we lit in 1951 by generating nuclear energy. We've built about 52 reactors out there at the site. I don't know if you've been to the Idaho National Lab or not, but if you're going to be in the energy business, you really need to. There's a tremendous resurgence of interest in nuclear. You know, the thing kind of went by the way after we had the unfortunate 3 Mile Island incident, but the renaissance in nuclear, not just in America, but around the world, is staggering. Coming off the drawing boards at INL and in the very near future are SMR, small modular reactors. It's going to be followed by the micro reactors. That is going to change the world as far as energy is concerned. And I'm glad to hear you talk about baseload, because when you're talking about nuclear, you're talking about baseload. And I suspect the world, as we go through this century, is going to rely heavily on nuclear. There's tremendous, as in my other hat I wear as chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, I deal with countries, particularly the Eastern European countries. They're entering contracts, and it is a national security issue because we compete with China, with Russia, and to a degree France when these new projects are coming on board. So thank you for what you're doing. God bless you. We welcome you.
Senator Gallego. Thank you. Governor, thanks again for joining me, and thank you for sitting down in my office, and appreciate our time together. We was kind of hit upon this, but one of the biggest interior-related issues is going to be the Colorado River. Arizona is at the heart of our national defense when it comes to ship making, agriculture, and food security, and of course home to the 5th largest and best city in the country. In addition, 22 of the 30 Colorado River Basin tribes are in Arizona. So rules governing the reductions to the Colorado River water expire at the end of 2026. And post-2026, operation conversations are still ongoing. The lower basin states have put forward a proposal for management of the Colorado River that shares the risk among all states. However, no agreement has been reached, and leading to potential conflicts within the basin, which of course we'd all like to avoid. Would you work with Arizona parties and my office so that any termination post-2026 is not overly burdensome to any one state and is consistent with the Colorado River Compact?
Well, Senator, you bring up a really important issue, and this is with the 2026 date looming, coming forward. And of course, as you know, Interior does have some specific authorities relative to helping with the lower and upper basin. I would say, as a former chair of Western governors, I know that this has been a battle that's going on as long as there have been people in the West. People are fighting over water in the West. My experience in North Dakota has been more on the Missouri River Basin, but also we've been in some deep battles with Canada because we've got 2 rivers that are in North Dakota that actually flow north into Canada, the Souris River and the Red River of the North. So whether it's international or the complexities of the Missouri, I've got some good understanding and good exposure to this, but I think you can count on that we're going to look for a collaborative solution that serves everyone. It's going to also, we're going to have to look for innovation on ways on the conservation side, because we can't make more water, but if we can use what we have wisely, that's going to look for the best solutions for all. But I appreciate that you're engaged in this. I know how important it is to Arizona and its economy.
Thanks, Governor. In our meeting, we also discussed a lot about our tribal communities and tribal nations. I'm very glad you have good background and understanding and relationships with them. And we talked a lot about tribal law enforcement and some of the bills that I've put forward to increase tribal law enforcement. But unfortunately, we see just high rates of missing and murdered women, as well as other violent crimes. A lot of it is really due to lack of tribal law enforcement and communications with our agencies that are supposed to be have oversight and collaboration. So, I've worked through my time in Congress to try and increase the funding for tribal law enforcement, but our federal budget cuts really put all that work at risk. So can you, tell me or think about, what is your plan to work collaboratively with Congress and tribes across the country on tribal law enforcement improvement efforts, and how do you plan to ensure that we can do this in a bipartisan manner?
Well, I think there's nothing partisan about enforcing the law and protecting the citizens of the United States. And one of the great tragedies in our country is the lack of law enforcement on tribal lands, and the fact that we've got organized crime that is, preying on those, the gaps. They're aware that the gaps are there, and whether it's the training centers. Senator Hoeven has been particularly supportive, along with Senator Kramer. We don't have enough training centers across the nation for the northern tribes or the southern tribes, so we need more recruiting, we need more staffing, we need lots of other things that are going on. But we also, you mentioned the first time it's come up, but the missing and murdered Indigenous women. I mean, this is again an unseen tragedy in America. I think the FBI list is now over 6,000 unsolved cases, and I believe again that it is a complete tragedy. It seems that we lose a college student at spring break, it's a Netflix series and the whole nation knows her name personally. And then we have these same individual tragedies that happen over and over again in Indian country, and people aren't even aware that it's going on. So we've got to change our entire approach to this.
And unfortunately, in the last 4 years, and thank you again for that, and I look forward to working with you on that, and I had a lot of sense of history on the House side on this. In the last 4 years, we've learned from reclamation that Glen Canyon Dam has some design flaws that limits its ability to pass water at lower elevations, which means we have to fix that dam and pretty soon, because we need the ability to essentially pass water around the dam if we actually obviously can't go through it, especially if the hydrology in the region gets worse. How would you make fixing the dam that delivers water to the Grand Canyon and the 30 million people downstream from that lower basin, and of course Mexico as part of our treaty obligations, a priority?
Well, Senator, appreciate you bringing that to my attention. This is one issue I was not aware of about the Glen Canyon Dam deficiencies, but obviously with the Bureau of Reclamation being the second largest operator of hydroelectric dams in the country behind the Army Corps of Engineers, I'll quickly be meeting with the team if I have the privilege of being confirmed for this position about this issue, because we've got to have working facilities on these critical rivers.
Well,
and as we know, we've got to have more reservoir capability, because part of the issue we're facing is that perhaps we not only need to fix, we got to upgrade some of these so that we can have more storage.
Yep, I'd love to work with that person. Thank you. Thank you, Governor. Yield back.
Senator Hyde-Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I think you guys will be very happy that I'm probably the last one, and this will soon be over. But I just certainly appreciate your willingness and your eagerness. I enjoyed the visit we had in my office and the sincerity that you have, but most of all, your capabilities. You're so capable for this position, and I'm very thankful to you and your family that you're willing to do this. I'm going to be brief, but one of the things we talked about in my office was a local Mississippi thing. William Faulkner once said, to understand the rest of the world, you first must understand a place like Mississippi. But we're very blessed with the National Park Services that we have several sites in Mississippi that certainly contribute to our tourism, the economy of our state, and we work with them very closely with public-private partnerships. In Vicksburg now, we are working on a visitor center with the state of Mississippi, public-private partnerships, and Vicksburg National Military Parks, Friends of the Park. So we certainly want to make sure that that continues. In Natchez, the state is enhancing 2 state-owned historical sites to better complement the Natchez National Historic Park sites. So, of course, I'd want to invite you to visit those, and asking for your willingness to commit to me working on these 2 particular projects in Vicksburg and Natchez.
Well, as Senator, thank you. And first of all, I just want to thank you, too, for your capabilities. It's great to have a senator who grew up in agriculture and also was an ag commissioner. That's fantastic. I spent most of my life, my family was all involved in agriculture my entire life, and many of my cousins still are. So it's such an important part of our national security as well. But in terms of the national park thing, as we said earlier, we've got a big deferred maintenance issue, and we have a big opportunity. These are the precious spots out of the billions of acres of surface, subsurface, and offshore that we own. The national park is for Americans is a priority, and we need to take care of these sites, whether historic or others. And again, we have to make sure that they're capable of handling and supporting the visitors that want to see them. We know they're great for the local economy. So appreciate the invitation and look forward to working with you.
Thank you on that. Now I'm going to go to South Mississippi, our offshore oil and gas production in the Gulf of Mexico. Of course, it plays a vital role in the Gulf states' economies as well. We call it our blue economy down there. The Anchor platform, it's recently come online with the Gulf of Mexico, but it will produce 75,000 barrels of oil per day. And this oil is refined in Pascagoula, Mississippi. And obviously the jobs that it provides there and the benefits that we have. But it is important that the department maintain a steady leasing schedule to ensure companies can continue the opportunities there for exploration, for new production to support the affordable, reliable energy. So the current National Outer Continental Shelf Oil and Gas Leasing Plan, or the 5-year plan, includes only 3 possible lease sales, a historic low. Do you believe the current 5-year plan is adequate to continue to meet the energy needs of the nation? And if not, will it be a priority for Interior to develop or finalize a new 5-year plan?
Well, Senator, I think that you know the long lead times it takes for the private sector to make the significant investments to do safe, secure, and smart, sophisticated offshore development. It's a really important part of our nation's economy and our national security. The fact that during the current administration, the lease sales have been so unpredictable and disruptive, and the fact that they're projecting forward to have among the fewest we've ever had, almost would guarantee that we would see a decline in energy production in offshore in the years ahead because of the lead times. And knowing that we're in a national security battle, and the way that we win, the way that we ensure America's future is that we've got energy dominance. This is opposed to the president's direction. The president would be saying we've got to be doing more smart development, not less. And as I stated earlier with one of the questions, in North Dakota, we literally were suing the federal government because they were not holding the lawfully required lease sales. So getting lease sales to be regular, predictable, and at a level that allows us to maintain energy production in our country is a minimum standard for us.
Thank you for those answers, and I cannot tell you how glad we are to have you. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Senator Wyden.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and let me say I very much look forward to working with you and Senator Heinrich. We've always worked on these issues in a bipartisan way, and I look forward to doing it again. Mr. Burgum, I think you know from our visit in the office how strongly I feel about these clean energy tax credits. I wrote this package, $400 billion or so, the biggest investment in fighting climate change in American history. It uses carrots, not sticks. The more you reduce carbon, the bigger your tax savings. It's private sector driven. And in what I consider to be a huge breakthrough, we reward technological neutrality. The reason that's so important, as you and I talked about, is nobody knows what the big carbon reducers are going to be 30 years from now. And so the reason I insisted on that provision is it creates what I call an innovation lane. It's an opportunity to send a message to people about every possible type of energy use, that you're going to have a chance, if you innovate, to be part of a very bright future. Now, I heard something, and I'm just counting on you to deny it, that maybe you weren't as interested in this as I thought you were in the office. So you seem kind of skeptical in some of the earlier discussion, and I just hope, because you're going to be very influential in the whole administration on energy, that we can work together on this. I believe we'll work together on a variety of other issues as well. Your thoughts?
Well, Senator, I really enjoyed our discussion in the time and the extra time we spent together. And I, as I said then, would restate now that I think your principles are really sound about being, technology neutral, about having carrots versus sticks, and also about having, private sector versus just all government.
I ought to quit while I'm ahead.
Yeah, well, that was all good, I mean, it's all good stuff. I think if, I don't know specifically other comments you may have heard, but I believe that these things may have been so successful as it relates to the electrical grid that have got now a significant imbalance in the amount of projects that are intermittent and not persistent, and we need to make sure for our country to be successful in the near term that we've got to get back to making sure that we've got the appropriate amount of base load to manage both of those things. Because if the sun's not shining, the wind's not blowing, and we don't have base load, then we got brownouts and blackouts. We got higher electric prices for every American. So it's the balance of trying to achieve that. And then the other point that I may have said today, which I would stand by, is that it's great that people thought, hey, let's put massive incentives around EVs, around electric vehicles, against fueled cars that have liquid fuels. But in America, if there's innovation neutrality, in North Dakota, we're producing carbon negative barrel of oil. We're producing carbon neutral biofuels. I mean, America built 200,000 gas stations without a dime of public money or taxpayer incentives because the market created that. And we have got an opportunity to have innovation in an innovation lane around decarbonizing liquid fuels. But so we just have to make sure we have the balance, because we need it all. We need it all to win the competition we're going to win.
Well, first of all, on the electric front, I'm very much of your view there. I mean, we have had big challenges in our part of the world. There's a transmission issue. The two pieces that are really left out is how to deal with electric and how to promote transmission. I'm very interested in working with you. I'm going to take, as I run back to the Finance Committee where we're talking about these issues, the view that you're open to continue working in this space rather than coming on in and just saying we're going to chuck it in the trash can, because I'm always interested in improving on something. I mean, the Founding Fathers said that a new Congress is never bound by absolutely everything from a past Congress. So I'm interested in improving it. But I'm going to take out of our discussion that you're open to working with me and others in a bipartisan way. At one point, this was a purely bipartisan kind of effort. We can talk about what happened, because I thought it was a question of who is going to get the credit. But I'm going to take out of here that you'll work with me.
Yeah, you can count on that I will, and you can also count on that I'm going to be anchored in two things. One is national security, so we shouldn't have incentives that enslave us to getting all of our critical minerals from a major power competitor like China. And then the other thing is you can count on is that I'm going to be focused on the economy and affordability, because if we can do something for $60 a ton versus $900 a ton, I'm going to choose the $60 a ton of avoided CO2.
My time is out, but I'm going to say the idea of linking a lower carbon future with lower prices and the focus on national security is a kind of triangle with three sides that I can support, and I'd like to work with you on it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator.
Senator Barrasso.
Thanks so much, Mr. Chairman. Governor, congratulations. Great to be with you again. Thanks for our time together. As you know, the federal government controls hundreds of millions of acres of land in the West. You'd like to look at this committee in our home states. And the well-being, certainly in my home state of Wyoming, depends on strong leadership at the Department of Interior. The department must work with states and local communities to manage our resources in a way that works for the people that actually live on the land. And over the last 4 years, that has been a big problem, as we've seen an administration that seemed to just be punishing the West. The will of the people who depend on the land, live on the land, take care of the land was ignored the last 4 years. So brings Wyoming the RMP. That stands for the Resource Management Plan, as you and I know, and those who are watching will know about now. The Bureau of Land Management finalized that just last month, December 2024. They did it not even a week after the governor of Wyoming submitted his appeal to the proposed plan, but they rushed out the door with this. This final plan is going to devastate the people of Southwest Wyoming. It's going to lock up millions of acres of land that local communities in the entire state relies upon. And the governor, our state legislature, the county commissioners, the local communities, all strongly oppose what the federal government is slamming down our throats. So will you commit to work with my office and the state to undo this disastrous plan?
Senator, I'm familiar, having been governor till December 15th, because we had a similar experience in North Dakota of having plans like this pushed on the state of North Dakota. So yeah, absolutely, you can count on me working with you.
Great. In Wyoming, about 2/3 of our minerals under the land are owned by the federal government, about half of the surface land and 2/3 of the minerals under the land. That means that energy development in my state depends on cooperation from the Department of Interior. Wyoming's legislative leaders would benefit from meeting with you directly as they plan the state's energy future, and I'd like to ask you to commit to joining our Wyoming delegation as well as the Wyoming stakeholders to talk about the future.
I would enjoy that very much, and I've enjoyed the relationship I had with Governor Matt Mead and now Governor Mark Gordon, that we've been on regular communication because there's been a lot of shared challenges between Wyoming and North Dakota.
And both of those current governor and former governor speak with you with great appreciation, great admiration, and great respect. So look forward to that. Buffalo, Wyoming. Last year, the outgoing administration finalized a resource management plan for Buffalo, the Buffalo, Wyoming field office. This plan would ban new coal leasing in the Powder River Basin, which is the most energy-rich area in the country. We are America's energy breadbasket in Wyoming. This short-sighted decision is an insult to our communities and harmful for American energy security. If confirmed, would you work with me to reverse this plan?
Absolutely, and I also know that and when we talk about critical minerals, that in that Powder River coal include many of the critical minerals that we need for defense, for technology, and for the future of this country. And so, rather than this blanket approach of trying to block that type of energy development, we need to be thinking about how innovation can help us solve multiple problems at once.
I want to move now to oil and gas leases. The outgoing administration has a disgraceful record on oil and gas management. It blocked and looked at and locked and blocked our production just about every turn. It hasn't issued leases for a lease sale held over 4 years ago, and they still haven't issued the leases. And it deferred over 600,000 acres from leasing in Wyoming that were previously cleared for oil and gas production. If confirmed, will you work to quickly issue those leases and offer additional acres for leasing?
Absolutely, and Senator, as I've stated before, North Dakota's faced the same, what I view as absolutely, if there's a case in federal court, which I'm positive the ruling is going to be that the current administration, the Biden administration, did not follow the law relative to holding required lease sales.
The next area is sage grouse. Wyoming is the home to a large population of greater sage grouse and its habitat. For over 15 years, Wyoming has been at the forefront of adopting new management approaches to protect the species. Our state has led successful efforts to balance conservation with economic development. Again, the Biden administration proposed to designate over 600,000 acres in Wyoming as, quote, areas of critical environmental concern. That's going to lock up thousands of acres in Wyoming, halting production and development across the state. Would you be willing to reopen the department's greater sage grouse management?
I've been advised that the rule of decision came out this morning. I don't want to put myself into making a forward statement that would recuse, that I would have to recuse. But I would just say from my time as chairman of Western Governors, I'm familiar with the use of designations to try to restrict energy development, even when you might have a species like the sage grouse that's neither on the endangered or the threatened list.
I'll ask one final question, and you've done quite a bit on the grizzly bear already, so let me talk about federal grazing. The Department of Interior is critical in its role for managing federal lands across the West. Almost half of the land in Wyoming, owned by the federal government, land managed under multiple use is required by law to be managed without impairment of the productivity of the land. These are public places that people from Wyoming depend on accessing for their livelihoods, agriculture, all the ranching activities, recreation, mineral development. Congress directed grazing, timber harvesting, recreation, energy, and mineral production to take place on federal lands. Will you support the multiple use mandate, the law mandates for federal land?
Absolutely, I do, Senator. And since we've talked about wildfires today, grazing reduces fuel load, timber management appropriately reduces fuel load, surface development can create roads paid for by the private sector that support our firefighters. All of the multiple use is a part of a component of a comprehensive rethinking of how we think about fire management on federal lands.
Thank you, Governor. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Cotton. Governor, welcome and congratulations. We've reached the regrettable point that we often do in the Senate where almost everything has been said, but not everyone has said it. I will refrain from saying a lot of what's gone before me, but I will say for the record that I want to associate myself with the comments of my Republican colleagues about the need for significantly increasing energy production while also being responsible stewards of our public lands and waters. There is, however, one issue I don't think has been discussed yet under the Endangered Species Act. And I think it's a scandal of the first order. I'm surprised it hasn't gotten more attention as of late. On January 3rd, the New York Times published a story about the so-called snail darter. It was a species that was designated as endangered by Fish and Wildlife back in the 1970s. The entire thrust of the story is that a zoologist basically made up this species of snail darter, all for the point of halting construction of the Tellico Dam on the Little Tennessee River. After many years of delay, it finally took an act of Congress to build that dam. A academic side in that article said that this is a not uncommon practice creating new species when there's really no difference between other extant non-endangered species for what he called the downstream conservation implications, which is to say activists creating species, calling them endangered to stop the construction of a dam or a power generation plant or a housing development. And again, this is something that was admitted publicly in the New York Times by some of these activists. That's why I say I think it's a scandal of the first order. Could I get your commitment in light of these admissions to go back and re-examine Endangered Species Act listings and identify any other potential false designations?
Senator Cotton, you raise a very important issue, which is the weaponization of federal rules, meant to actually protect wildlife, but to do it in a way where it's being used not to protect wildlife, but it's being used to stop legal activities like the multiple use scenario we were just talking about with Senator Barrasso. It's just a legal weapon, and it's used for fundraising. It's used for groups that are just trying to block our nation's progress. And so I agree with you completely. And you mentioned the New York Times. If that article was someplace else, but the fact that the New York Times wrote that article, I found to also be remarkable admission of at least one case where there was the abuse of the Endangered Species Act relative to its intended use. So yes, you can count. Absolutely.
Thank you. I appreciate that, because also I think not in light just of this public admission, but also the West Virginia case and the Loper-Bright case, there could be legal infirmity in a lot of our federal bureaucracy's past decisions. So I appreciate your willingness to take a look at that once you're on the job. Thank you very much.
That concludes round one. We're going to do a quick round two with some follow-ups that a few members have asked. I want to talk to you briefly about the fact that public lands represent a massive public asset, and yet a lack of an accurate valuation is something that we don't have, and that undermines informed decision-making about their use and their management. What steps would you take, if confirmed as Secretary, to improve the transparency in this area and ensure federal land valuations reflect their value to the American people?
Well, I would just say on this idea that what I'll call America's balance sheet is something that the Trump administration has quite a bit of enthusiasm in discussions with Treasury nominee Scott Bessent, Commerce nominee Howard Lutnick, and even Speaker Mike Johnson called me a few weeks ago and said, hey, what's this American balance sheet idea? I mean, I think for our standing in the world, for us to talk nonstop about what our liabilities are, we should also be fluent, just as any business would be, to be able to talk about what our assets, and the assets of this country, I think, outpace any place in the world because of the care that we've given, in particular to the public lands, the surface, the subsurface, and the offshore. And we've proven time and time again that we can do it better, cleaner, and safer than anyone else here. If I'm a timber company and I own timber land and it's not been harvested, I put that on my balance sheet. If I've got timberland and I've planted young trees, I put it on my balance sheet at a different valuation. When we protect U.S. lands and then don't cut a tree and then they burn down, we not only produce enormous amounts of emissions and enormous amounts of carbon, but we also have effectively wasted the public's asset. And I think it's part of our duty in the role, if I have the privilege of being nominated here, but all of us as elected officials, to make sure that we're getting a return on the nation's balance sheet for the benefit and the use of the American people. So understanding that number, I think, is key. I would just say one last thing. People say, oh, it's going to be really hard. It's really hard to develop it. We did this in North Dakota. When I took office, they said, well, we have no way of knowing what our undeveloped minerals are. And we found a young software company that was able to figure out precisely what the future value of every one of the wells in North Dakota on public land would be worth. It's been used for estate planning. If grandma dies and she's only got 10% of one well, they can figure out the value for that. If we can do that there, we can figure it out for the whole country. And just as I said to Speaker Johnson, we're required as a nation to conduct a census within every 10 years, not every 10 years, but within 10 years, do a census. That's hard work, but we figure out a way to do it. I would think if Congress stood up and said, hey, every agency, every bureau, every department of the United States government needs to figure out what their asset value is, then we get after it, and we get after it, and we come up with a number, and then we can make these trade-offs. When you do by executive order and take hundreds of millions of offshore subsurface out of leasing, and that's viewed as a costless event, at least we could have the trade-off of say, yes, some people thought it was important to take that off of the table, but what did it mean for the American people? Did we just take trillions of dollars of future revenue out of the pockets of our future generations? And so I think, again, creating a financial understanding that is where we can have an honest discussion about some of these executive actions that are happening at the end of this term, for example, would be useful for all Americans to understand.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I've got another question that I was going to ask regarding PILT. In the interest of time, I'm going to forego that. I'll just conclude it with a very brief statement. PILT, payment in lieu of taxes, the federal government came up with it, Congress came up with it about 50 years ago to help offset the burden states carry, states with a lot of public land, because they don't receive any property tax revenue from it, so it's supposed to offset that. In some parts of the country where there's a lot of public land, this works out okay. In other parts, it's pennies on the dollar compared to what they would get if they could tax the land even at its lowest valuation and lowest rate. So I would love to talk to you about PILT reforms and making PILT generally a priority, because a lot of these communities rely on it for fire, search and rescue, schools, safety, so forth. Senator Heinrich.
Governor, Senator Daines mentioned a very specific challenge with the Endangered Species Act, but as a governor, you know that one of the best ways to head off those conflicts is to prevent species from ever being listed by recovering them through proactive voluntary conservation at the state level. Senator Tillis and 9 of his Republican colleagues and I have a highly bipartisan bill called the Recovering America's Wildlife Act that helps states do exactly that. And in fact, North Dakota's former Game and Fish Director, Terry Steinwand, was one of the architects of that legislation. It's got strong support from the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, from many of the conservation groups that you mentioned in your exchange with Senator Justice. Does that sound like the kind of approach that you could work with Senator Tillis and I on?
Absolutely, Senator Heinrich. I think that, again, super sound principle there, which is to do the work to keep it off of the any kind of federal designation, working collaboratively with the states. I had the pleasure of working with our Game and Fish Commissioner, Terry Steinwand, for 6 of my 8 years as governor. He had almost a 40-year career in wildlife management. It's people like that I know and respect across all the states. I know you've got them in New Mexico. I know we've got them in Utah. I mean, the people that work in game and fish at the state level that are working on these things. I haven't met somebody from the federal level that flies into North Dakota that cares more about the soil, the air, the water, the fish, the wildlife than the people that we have at the state level. And we should just, this sounds like you're entrusting this back to the states, and that's where it belongs.
And it was really an idea that grew out of asking all of those agencies, like, what's the right way to approach this? And they said, well, instead of, just having an emergency room, which is what the Endangered Species Act effectively is, let's try to give wildlife primary care. Let's intervene when it's much cheaper and much more effective, and you can really move the needle. You and I talked a little bit about tribal water settlements. Those are incredibly important for water certainty in the West, especially with all the, conflicts we have, not just in the Colorado Basin, but also in the Rio Grande Basin and other western basins. If you're confirmed, will you commit to continuing the department's work to both resolve legal claims around tribal water settlements, but also just implement the existing water settlements that have already been made?
Well, you've got my commitment to work on those important issues.
Great. I'm going to make one other quick statement. I know you heard from my friend and colleague from Idaho, and we've done some great work together on cleaning up abandoned mines. We don't necessarily agree on wind generation, but I would simply remind you that onshore wind is in that basket of multiple use, and so you can always hold it to the same standard as oil and gas, but you can't legally, at least, unilaterally deny legally permitted wind generation. So with that, thank you for all of your answers today.
Senator King.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I want to associate myself with your comments, Mr. Chairman, on determining the asset value of what we own. It's astounding that that doesn't exist. And one of the things that would contribute to, as we discussed previously, is adequate maintenance budgets. If you know the asset value, there are sort of standard industry percentages that should be. I believe that's an important step. I presume you believe climate change is a problem. Is that correct?
Yeah, I believe that climate change is a global phenomenon for sure.
I noted the biographical material that in 2021 as governor, you set a goal for North Dakota of carbon neutrality by 2030 to be achieved in a variety of ways. And as you mentioned, you've really worked hard on the carbon neutrality of fossil fuel extraction and fossil fuel use. I'm a little worried today, though. You keep distinguishing between intermittent and baseload. Would you agree that renewable resources, solar and wind, for example, can be developed if they are adequately, if they can be integrated into the grid in a safe and reliable way?
Yes, they can, and it's not for me personally for any political reasons that I distinguish. It's just because of physics, the physics of the grid. If we don't have enough base load, and it's the base load that we have that's allowed our nation to make the investments into the intermittent.
I don't want the word, in a former life, I developed both base load and intermittent resources. I don't want the word base load to be code for no renewables. That's not what you're saying, is it?
No, we need a balance, but they cannot, the intermittent, if you want to call them renewables, is used as a positive word, but this is a fact of life, is they're intermittent. And when they're intermittent, until we have storage solutions, and we're years away from having significant enough cost-effective storage to support that, we need to have the base load, or the intermittent doesn't even have a life.
But it can be integrated. In your case in North Dakota, 35% of your electricity comes from wind power. I presume your grid works.
Well, it's super stressed as it is around the country. We're in parts of two grids. We're part of MISO going east, and we're part of SPP going west. And you can have days when the rated capacity is 30, but you got a day when the wind's blowing. The wind's blowing so hard it drives all the base load off of production. And then the next day it's 20 below and there's no wind blowing, and we got no wind, and then you got to crank up the base load again. And so
that's one of the most important reasons that we've talked about innovation. We need to work on storage. You would agree, I think, that renewables or intermittents, whatever you want to call them, plus storage equals baseload.
Yes, but right now at a much higher cost. And so then, of course, we want to not only have it be reliable, we also want to have it be affordable. And so that's part of what we have to look at as a nation, is what cost are we willing to take on to try to achieve those goals. And I believe in if it's all of the above, if we can decarbonize traditional fuels cheaper than we can subsidize some of the renewables, then that should be looked at fairly and equitably and economically, because that's a better path forward for every citizen if we can do it more affordably.
I wouldn't disagree with that, but we've talked a lot about innovation, and I'm a great believer in American innovation. And the cost, for example, of solar panels has gone from, I don't know, $70 a kilowatt down to 70 cents. I mean, battery storage, for example, in Maine, there is a project underway for an 85 megawatt, 100-hour grid scale storage at a reasonable cost, because it's not based on lithium ion, or it's based on iron. And so if we're moving into a period where innovation, I believe, will bring storage down. And of course, as you know, wind and solar are the cheapest forms of energy today on a levelized basis, understanding that storage and backup is part of that calculation. But I hope that you'll work with the Department of Energy. Mr. Wright was here yesterday, and one of his business interests was in geothermal and batteries. So I just, when I hear base load used sometimes in these contexts, it sounds like no more renewables. I don't think that's a sustainable path for this country, and it's certainly not a way of meeting the challenge of climate change, which you've acknowledged is a serious one.
No, we need all forms of electricity, and we need more of it in the very near term. And so this is not about one versus the other. This is about how do we drive forward and increase the amount of electricity we have in the country. So I'm a both. All of the above in terms of our approach on how we do it, but we got to do it in a way that's we have affordability and reliability. On the storage side, there is a future, but having been in tech for 30 years, batteries get better at about 2% a year, and that's what it's been for 30 or 40 years. And there's no breakthrough that's coming. Yes, it's improving, but it's not like the microchip, which doubles in power.
It may not be Moore's law, but I think the amount of resources that are going into this research at the Department of Energy and in other places, and the development of this iron-based grid scale storage, there are opportunities for significant base loads. I like your answer where you said we need it all. I appreciate having that on the record.
Yep.
Thank you very much, Governor. Appreciate you having
Thank you, Senator.
being with us.
Senator Hickenlooper.
I ran down the hall to get here. I didn't want to miss my chance for a second question, second round of questions. And again, thank you for your service as a governor and all the way through your career. You've shown a real inclination both through your government service, but through your philanthropy to engage in the community and to go to the community. I think the letters from the tribes and what I've heard from our tribes in Colorado, that you are held in very, very high esteem, I think, across this country. And I think that's going to be a powerful thing. I have one curious question. I think they're still doing it with the Western Governors Association. Do they still meet with the Secretary of the Interior in December, or did they stop doing that?
There's been a tradition to meet with the Secretary of Interior when they have their annual meeting in Washington, D.C., which is usually in late January, early February, and I would look forward to having the opportunity for that invitation. If you know anybody there that could be, send me one.
Well, I knew that other governors are watching our discussion, so I want to make sure I got that out there.
I think your own Governor Polis may be the current chair.
This governor thing's getting kind of thick, isn't it?
Well, it's distilled down pretty much just us left. I want to talk a little bit about the Colorado River, and it's a 25-year drought, but a longer-term drought, and we're able to go back. This is a geologist in me, but there's sediments throughout the Grand Canyon that can be correlated, and this appears to be the worst drought in 10,000 years. I mean, this is a serious drought, and you've got 40 million people that depend on this, and we've been working aggressively with the lower basin states and the upper basin states. And one of the things I was, even before you began running for the highest office, the work that you did around water in North Dakota, where roughly the largest investments in water infrastructure ever, but half of it was for making sure you got clean water, and half of it was to make sure you were protecting against flood. I thought it was a great model for what the Department of Interior would have. And I think you have to kind of look at the Colorado River in that sense too. I think that the Bureau of Reclamation plays a significant role there, but I think a strong leader being able to find and incentivize those innovations of how do we make sure we're saving water and doing more with the water that we have rather than fighting over it. And there's a long tradition in the West of whiskeys for drinking, waters for fighting, as we said last week. Anyway, speak a little bit about that, of how you look at of kind of working with the Colorado River, but there are a whole number of river basins that are in drought right now.
Yes, and we've got a tremendous water resource in this country. When we think about the Great Lakes, you think about the Columbia, you think about the Yukon, the Mississippi sometimes is flooding when the Colorado's in drought. We just maybe don't have it all in the right places at the right time, and where we've got population centers. And so I think, again, with smart planning, innovation, collaboration, when we've been successful in North Dakota with private-public partnerships, it's included, solutions, again, with great help from Senator Hoeven, playing a huge role on the federal. I mean, one of the projects we have there is a couple $2 billion. It's a third federal, it's a third local, with a local sales tax, huge buy-in locally, and then the state stepping up and participating. So, and when we did that together, this project's going to get done in 6.5 or 7 years, as opposed to 20 or 25 or never, with something, because we have that experience in North Dakota too. We got water projects at the federal level that were started in the 1960s that still haven't fulfilled their full mission.
Right.
So anyway, I think there's an opportunity to work together to come up with solutions.
And that timeliness does magnify what can get done. The Bureau of Reclamation has done a lot of work in Colorado, I think across the West, and I think I'm universal that I haven't heard a single senator, Republican or Democrat, complain about how they've approached this. They have a bunch of projects that are midway, and I'm hopeful that I know there's going to be, there's a lot of talk about a tax cut and a lot of talk about how they're going to pay for that tax cut. Hopefully we can protect those funds that have been committed to various water projects, because the worst thing you can have, and this has happened to Colorado 2 or 3 times over the past several decades, where you get halfway out, you're building something, and then all of a sudden the support goes away.
Yeah, agree. Having a secure and predictable forms of capital for these projects. When you have the instability, the uncertainty, then the people that are bidding on the projects bid higher. They have to take out more risk on their side. Their insurance companies that are supporting them on the private side say, don't do this. When we were able to go to the private-public partnership and we could create certainty that they would have the permits, that lowered the cost dramatically, and not only the time to get it done, but it also lowered the cost.
That's music to my ears, and we agree completely. So we'll remember this conversation 3 years from now, and I'm sure who knows what the future will bring. But I appreciate that commitment to the long-term solutions. I think that is necessary on almost every level in this country.
Great, thank you, Senator.
Thank you,
Senator Hoeven.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One quick item for the record. As you know, I've passed legislation to keep horses in the Theodore Roosevelt National Park. I'm a horse fan. You and your wife are horse fans. I just want to know that you'll commit to the record to continue to work on that very important issue with me.
Absolutely. And for the record, people should know that as popular as Senator Hoeven is in our state, the horses in the national park have even more followers on social media than he does.
Yeah, no question. And then just one final item. I think you've demonstrated to both sides of the aisle your absolute willingness to work with everybody to achieve good outcomes and a good outcome for this country. And that's exactly what we want in somebody that goes into these important positions. And so thank you to Catherine. And then just if there's anything for the record that you want to add to the record, I would just give you this opportunity before turning things back to the chairman. And again, I want to thank both the chairman and the ranking member as well.
Well, the only thing I would do quickly is close with gratitude to Chairman Lee and Ranking Member Heinrich, thank you for your time ahead of time. Thank you for making your members available to me for meetings ahead of time. And thanks for this great dialogue and discussion today. I've received a lot of invitations from members to come and visit. I would be remiss if I didn't, before I leave, to extend an invitation on behalf of Senator Hoeven, Senator Kramer, and myself to come to the grand opening of the Theodore Roosevelt Presidential Library and Museum, which is currently scheduled for July 4th, 2026. And it's an official USA 250 event. And of course, it's going to have an opportunity to tell the story of leadership and citizenship and conservation that really began during the time when Theodore Roosevelt spent time in North Dakota. His wife and his mother tragically died on the same day in the same house, on Valentine's Day of 1884, and he had a newborn infant daughter that was 2 days old. He handed that off to his sister, and he got on the train, and he was deeply despondent, and went west and remade himself from the, he'd had a childhood of that was full of sickness, and he went from a sickly Easterner and became a rough and tumble Westerner cowboy, learned the hard way out there with a lot of time in the saddle, and built the Elkhorn Ranch. And from then he developed his thoughts about conservation in this country. And we know the story that went from there. That led him to become the Rough Rider that he was, that propelled him into becoming a governor. Formed the National Governors Association, saved football. I mean, now the largest viewed sport. And the NCAA was formed because Theodore Roosevelt was listening to concerns from mothers whose too many of their sons were dying of head injuries playing football in the Ivy League schools without protections. And so he said, let's come up with some standard safety protections. So there's many stories about TR that haven't been told like that, but the only president to receive a Medal of Honor for his time in the military. One of his sons also received a Medal of Honor, who was there at Normandy in World War II. But incredible story, and of course Nobel Peace Prize that he received for negotiating the settlement between Russia and Japan. And he wrote more books than all the other presidents combined. He wrote more letters than Jefferson and Washington. We're in the process of digitizing all of that. This will be the first digital presidential library. It'll be one of the most sustainable buildings built in North America. And it's in the heart of the Badlands that he loved, at a gateway community that goes into the Theodore Roosevelt National Park. And in closing, I would say someone asked this 4th of July, are you going to have fireworks? Per tradition, when you open a presidential library, all living presidents are invited. So we may, if they all show up, we may not need to have additional fireworks. But it'll be great, because there's a lot of what we know about Theodore Roosevelt that still lives on today. And think about the discussions we're having. The Panama Canal wouldn't have happened without him, and how important that was for our country during World War II, and how important it is for our future going forward. So, in water, of course, in Arizona, he was, some of the original water systems in Arizona were dedicated and created by Theodore Roosevelt. One of the first wildlife refuges that he made in the country was in North Dakota at Stump Lake. He sent us on a way to build out the national park system as we know it right now. So it's with a bit of serendipity and a great amount of excitement that as Secretary of Interior, I'll look forward to being at that opening along with all of you. This committee's all officially invited as of right now. It would be great to have you all there. And with that, again, thank you, senators, and especially thank you, Senator Hoeven and Kramer, for your folks, your support, your friendship, and your mentorship for all these years.
Thank you, Governor. It's been a great hearing, and I appreciate the participation of all the members of the staff, members of the committee, and especially our Capitol Police Force keeping us safe today. I'm sure that given all the time he spent in North Dakota, Theodore Roosevelt learned correctly to pronounce the name of the animal that is called the bison.
It is. It does have a Z. I agree with
it's got a Z.
B-I-Z.
It's a Z that, well, it's not a silent Z. It's just an invisible one. With all that,
Mr. Chairman, do you know what the Lady Buffalo said to her little boy as he was going off to school?
Oh no, I don't. What did he say?
Bye, son.
That's it.
I would also mention that Teddy Roosevelt coined.
I love it. I just love it.
Going to open up a whole new debate.
He coined the term malefactors of great wealth. I'll just leave it at that.
Hovind's going to be telling that one for weeks. The record will stand open until 6 p.m. today for questions for the record. We stand adjourned.